Welcome, geeks and geekettes, to another edition of What You Readin'. People ask me all the time, what are you reading when you're not writing, when you're not busy writing away? What are you reading? What are you reading for pleasure? What are you reading for research? And, well, I'm here to give you my perspective on all that. As I stated in a previous video, Fantagraphics is doing the Lord's work for us comic book fans, or us real deep, hardcore comic book nerds and geeks. They're reprinting, they've started this beautiful set of reprints, lovingly restored, of the Atlas comics from the 1950s. And if you're not already aware, Atlas was the precursor to Marvel. Atlas became Marvel Comics. And this book, it celebrates the career of Joe Maneely. Now, you may be a huge Marvel fan and never heard of Joe Maneely. It's because Joe Maneely's career sadly ended just before the dawn of the Marvel age of comics. And this is it's an expensive book. It's a $75 book, but it's a big, huge, oversized hardcover with some primo Maneely from all the different genres that he worked at Marvel. Maneely was an incredibly prolific guy. He was like Stan Lee's artistic right hand man at Atlas. He worked in war comics, western, horror, humor. I mean, anything they threw at this guy. He worked on the satire magazines they did. He's an excellent cartoonist, excellent draftsman, and fast. He could produce 2-3 pages a day, pencils and inks, in this detailed style that he had. It's sort of a loosey goosey cartooning style, but then when he would go in with his inks, and he had this really crunchy inking style, and he's instrumental in creating a lot of characters that you might be familiar with if you're a Marvel fan, including Black Knight, which started out as a medieval adventure, and that was pretty much created by Stan and Joe Maneely. He did some work on Atlas's abortive attempt to bring back the superhero characters in the early 50s. And that's really his only superhero work, was doing covers for Submariner. As I said, he worked in war comics, and for my money, he was right up there with Russ Heath and John Severin as far as accuracy. He liked drawing things to be authentic. I have a little problem with his Black Knight armor. It's all over the map, and a lot of it's really made up. But I blame that on the fact that there simply wasn't enough reference available to him. Whereas in the war stuff, he had all the reference that he needed. In his morgue file, he's really good at westerns. Did quite a few runs on Two Gun Kid, Wyatt Earp, Black Rider, a number of other Atlas's titles, and he was a valuable member of the Atlas team because Atlas was producing 70 or more titles a month. I mean, they was flooding the newsstand with stuff. And Maneely was, banging out covers, banging out stories in his really terrific style. And if we didn't already know that Stan Lee had a great affinity for Maneely, he liked him as a friend. He relied on him heavily as an artist. Further proof of that is how many times Stan wanted Joe to draw his stories. And this is in a period when there were other writers at Atlas, but Stan always seemed to save his best stories for Maneely and want Maneely on them. And those are some of the best stories in here. The Stan Lee pen stories, except for a couple of really, really good Hank Chapman war stories. The best stories in here are penned by Stan with Joe. And apparently Joe wrote one of his own stories as well, which is included in this collection. But like I said, this guy had it all: storytelling, this appealing style, and any genre, anything you threw at this guy, he had an authority at. It makes you wonder what would have happened if he had continued on with Atlas into the Marvel Age. And that's where the story gets kind of tragic because, well, no, not kind of tragic, very tragic. Um, Manili died in a bizarre, like, freak accident. He fell from a commuter train and died. It was a terrible accident and an enormous blow to Atlas Comics, which was already having a hard time because they had lost their distributor. And I've talked about this before in other videos. They lost the distributor. The same distributor that distributed Dell Comics was distributing Marvel. So Marvel had a wide distribution network. And that's why they were able to produce 70 titles a month that would sell. I mean, they were raking it in on the comics. But they lost their distributor, and they had to sign up with National Periodical Publications, DC Comics. DC Comics was distributing Atlas Comics from the very late 50s all the way into the 60s. This was a problem for Atlas because DC didn't like the competition, and so they immediately restricted Atlas to only 16 titles, and Atlas had to cut back drastically. They had to lay people off, they had to fire people, and for a long time they were just reprinting inventory material that had been created for the 70 titles they thought they were going to be producing for each month. And Joe Manili kind of bridges that period, and Stan's going to rely heavily on him. But things are looking bad. Martin Goodman, Stan's uncle, who owned Atlas Comics, as well as a number of other, he owned a pretty large magazine publishing business. They're publishing men's magazines, girly magazines, crossword puzzle books, true crime and true confession kind of stuff, real pulpy sweat magazines. And they were still making money, and they were still being distributed robustly. Whereas the comics, Goodman thought, were dying. And so it really looked like he was going to shutter the doors and just sort of like stop doing comics altogether. And some of this was driven by the death of Joe Manili. Apparently, this guy was so well liked, so beloved, that his death was really a blow. He's 32 years old. The guy's gone, and he was like a rock for them. And now he's gone. And they said part of the reason for Goodman wanting to end the comic division was his own sadness over the death of Joe Manili. And it says something for Manili's personality that a hard-hearted businessman like Martin Goodman was affected, that he was touched by this man's passing and was going to shutter the doors. And then who should arrive on the scene but Jack Kirby? And Kirby shows up at Marvel and he realizes, hey, you lost your most prolific artist. Can I help? Can I step in here? And so Jack comes in and he and Stan present to Goodman a plan for the future of how to proceed with the business. And Jack always had a million ideas, and he presents all these ideas, and Goodman decides to give Stan a little more rope, give him a little more time to get his shit together and maybe make something out of Marvel Comics. But the sword of Damocles is hanging over him. And eventually, even Stan and Jack can't really make things happen. They can't really generate the kind of cash that Goodman's looking for the comic end. And he gives them basically like a couple of months to, a couple of more months, boys, and this is the end. And that's when Stan, Jack, Steve Ditko, Don Heck create the Marvel Universe. Fantastic Four #1, Hulk #1, Spider-Man, Iron Man. All of this grows out of desperation, and all of it grows out of the aftermath of the passing of Joe Manili. And it leaves one to wonder, what would the future of Marvel Comics been had not Joe Manili died? It's like, is there an alternate universe where Joe Manili is the star of the Marvel Universe rather than Jack Kirby? Or is there a parallel universe where it's Jack, Steve, Don, and Joe Manili? creating titles. It kind of boggles this nerd's mind as to what that world might have been, what those comics might have looked like. But anyway, if you got the shekels to, I highly recommend this volume. It's a tremendous sampling of Manili's work. It's a beautiful package, and thank you, Fantagraphics, for doing this. I hope this Atlas line is successful for them. I'm going to be buying every single one. These are comics I've always wanted to read, and never had a chance. And like I said, they're lovingly reproduced by the folks at Fantagraphics. So that's it and I'll be back. I'll read some more, and I'll tell you more about it. See you down the road.